It starts long before anyone says a word to you. It begins in the quiet, unseen place where your standards are formed. The way you see yourself becomes the blueprint for how others treat you. If you believe you deserve to be heard, you will carry yourself in a way that invites attention. If you believe you deserve to be respected, you will naturally reject anything that falls beneath that level. But if deep down you question your worth even slightly, you will find yourself tolerating what should have never been acceptable in the first place. Not because you want to, but because you've unknowingly decided that it's all you can expect. Think about how often people stay in situations that drain them, conversations that belittle them, or relationships that slowly chip away at their confidence. It rarely starts with a bold act of disrespect. It starts small, a comment brushed off, a boundary ignored, a moment where something feels off but nothing is said, and in that silence a pattern begins to form. Each time it happens without resistance, it reinforces a silent agreement. It tells the world, this is okay. And over time, what was once uncomfortable becomes normal. But here's the shift that changes everything. The moment you decide that you are no longer available for that version of yourself, the version that tolerates less, that shrinks to avoid tension, that convinces itself to accept what doesn't feel right, that decision doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't require a dramatic announcement. It begins internally. A quiet but firm line drawn within. A standard reset. A new belief that says, I deserve better than this, and I'm willing to stand by that. From that place, your actions begin to align. You start noticing things you once ignored. You respond differently. You pause before agreeing to something that doesn't sit right. You question behavior that used to go unchallenged. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. And people notice. They may not always like it, especially if they benefited from your previous silence. But your responsibility isn't to maintain their comfort. It's to protect your self-respect. This doesn't mean every interaction becomes a confrontation. In fact, most of the time it's the opposite. When your internal belief is strong, your presence speaks before your words do. There's a calm certainty in how you carry yourself, a quiet confidence that doesn't need to prove anything, but also doesn't tolerate being diminished. And that energy sets the tone. It changes the dynamic without force. There will be moments where speaking up feels uncomfortable, where the old habit of staying quiet tries to pull you back. That's natural. Growth always feels unfamiliar at first, but each time you choose to honor your worth instead of abandoning it, you strengthen that belief. You make it more real. You turn it from an idea into a standard, and eventually something powerful happens. You stop questioning whether you deserve respect. It becomes a given. Not because the world suddenly changed, but because you did. Because you decided that your worth is not up for negotiation. Because you no longer wait for others to validate what you already know to be true. Everything shifts from that point forward. The conversations you allow, the people you keep around, the way you show up in every space, it all begins with what you believe you deserve. Silence is often misunderstood as strength. From a young age, many are taught that staying quiet is the mature choice, that holding back words keeps the peace, that restraint is a sign of control. And in some moments, that's true. Not every situation requires a reaction. Not every comment deserves a response. But there's a difference between choosing silence with intention and defaulting to silence out of fear. One is power. The other is a slow erosion of self-worth. The problem begins when silence becomes a habit rather than a decision. When you consistently choose not to speak, not because it's wise, but because it feels safer, safer than risking disagreement, safer than being misunderstood, safer than standing out. And in that safety, something important is lost. Because every time you silence yourself to avoid discomfort, you send a quiet message inward that your voice is less important than the moment you're trying to escape. It doesn't happen all at once. It builds gradually. A thought you hold back in a meeting, a boundary you don't express in a relationship, a moment where you feel disrespected but convince yourself it's not worth addressing. Each instance seems small on its own, almost insignificant. But together, they create a pattern. A pattern where your needs become secondary, where your opinions remain unheard, where your presence becomes quieter, not because you have nothing to say, but because you've trained yourself not to say it. Over time, that silence starts to shape your identity. You begin to question whether your thoughts are worth sharing. You hesitate before speaking, even in situations where your input is valuable. You replay conversations in your head, thinking of what you could have said, what you should have said, what you wish you had the courage to say. And that gap between what you feel and what you express grows wider. True strength is not found in that gap. It's found in closing it, in aligning your voice with your values, in recognizing that your perspective matters even when it's not popular, even when it creates tension, even when it challenges the status quo. Speaking up is not about being loud or confrontational. It's about being honest. It's about honoring what you feel instead of dismissing it for the comfort of others. There will always be a cost. Silence feels easier in the moment because it avoids immediate conflict. but the long-term cost is far greater. It shows up as resentment, as frustration, as a quiet dissatisfaction that's hard to explain. Because deep down, you know you're not fully showing up as yourself. You know you're holding back parts of who you are, and that awareness doesn't disappear. It lingers. On the other hand, using your voice comes with its own discomfort. It may lead to disagreement. It may not always be received the way you hope, but it also brings clarity. It sets expectations. It allows others to understand where you stand, and most importantly, it reinforces your sense of self. Every time you choose to speak honestly, you affirm that your voice has value. This is not about speaking in every moment or reacting to every situation. It's about recognizing when your silence is costing you more than your words ever could. It's about choosing to show up fully, even when it feels uncomfortable. Because your self-worth is not something to be negotiated in the name of keeping things easy. Silence can protect you in certain moments, but it should never be the reason you lose yourself. Boundaries are not something you announce once and expect the world to follow. They are something you live consistently through your choices, your responses, and your willingness to walk away from what does not align. People are constantly observing not just what you say you value, but what you actually tolerate. And in that observation, they learn how to engage with you. Not because they are trying to test you, but because human behavior naturally adjusts to the standards that are reinforced over time. Most people think boundaries are about telling others what to do. In reality, they are about deciding what you will accept and what you will no longer participate in. It's a subtle but powerful shift. Because when your focus is on controlling others, you lose your grounding. But when your focus is on your own actions, your own standards, your own limits, you take full ownership of your experience. You move from reacting to shaping the environment around you. The challenge is that boundaries often feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you've spent a long time prioritizing harmony over honesty. You may worry about how others will respond. You may fear being seen as difficult or distant. And in that fear, it becomes tempting to soften your limits, to make exceptions, to go back to what feels familiar. But every time you do that, you blur the line you were trying to create. You send mixed signals, and mixed signals lead to inconsistent treatment. Clarity is what gives boundaries their strength. Not harshness, not volume, but clarity. When you are clear about what you accept and what you don't, your communication becomes simpler. You don't need long explanations or justifications. You express your limits calmly, directly, and without apology, and then you follow through. Because without follow-through, a boundary is just a suggestion. There will be moments when people push back, not necessarily out of disrespect, but because they are adjusting to a version of you they are not used to. If someone has experienced your flexibility for a long time, your firmness may feel unfamiliar. That doesn't mean it's wrong, it means it's new, and new dynamics take time to settle. Some people will respect it immediately, others may take longer, and some may choose not to respect it at all. That's where your consistency matters most. Boundaries are not about creating distance for the sake of it, they are about creating space for what is healthy. When you set clear limits, you allow room for mutual respect to grow. You make it easier for others to understand how to interact with you in a way that feels aligned, and in doing so, you improve the quality of your relationships, not by controlling them, but by defining your role within them. There is also an internal effect that often goes unnoticed. Each time you uphold a boundary, you reinforce your own sense of self-respect. You prove to yourself that your needs are valid, that your time matters, that your energy is worth protecting, and that internal reinforcement changes how you show up. It builds confidence, not in a loud or dramatic way, but in a steady, grounded way that others can feel. Over time, something shifts. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself as much. You no longer feel guilty for saying no. You no longer question whether your limits are justified. They simply become part of who you are. And as that happens, the way people treat you begins to reflect that standard. Not because you demanded it, but because you demonstrated it consistently through your actions. People learn how to treat you by what you allow, what you reinforce, and what you walk away from. Boundaries are the language through which you teach them. Confidence is often seen as something you either have or you don't, as if it's a fixed trait that shows up fully formed. But in reality, confidence is built in real time, in the small, uncomfortable moments where you choose to use your voice instead of hiding behind hesitation. It's not created in perfect conditions. It's created when your heart is racing, when your thoughts feel scattered, when part of you wants to stay silent, but another part knows you shouldn't. Most people wait to feel confident before they speak. They rehearse in their minds, searching for the perfect words, the perfect tone, the perfect moment. And while they wait, the moment passes. The opportunity to express, to clarify, to stand up for themselves slips away. What they don't realize is that confidence doesn't come before action. It comes because of it. Every time you speak up despite the discomfort, you create evidence for yourself that you are capable. And that evidence becomes the foundation of real confidence. In the beginning, it won't feel natural. Your voice might shake, your words may come out imperfectly. You might second-guess yourself immediately after speaking. That's part of the process. Because confidence is not about flawless delivery. It's about honest expression. It's about choosing to show up as you are, without waiting to be fully ready. Readiness is often an illusion. Growth happens in the act, not in the preparation. There is a turning point that comes when you stop measuring your confidence by how others respond. If your sense of confidence depends on approval, it will always feel unstable. Some people will agree with you, others won't. Some will appreciate your honesty, others may resist it. That's outside your control. What is within your control is whether you honored your voice in that moment, whether you chose to speak when it mattered. When you shift your focus to that, confidence becomes internal. It becomes something you build, not something you seek. Speaking up also changes how you see yourself. Each time you do it, you rewrite a small part of your identity. You move from being someone who stays quiet to someone who engages, from someone who avoids discomfort to someone who can handle it. And those shifts compound over time. They don't just affect one conversation, they influence how you walk into the next room, how you approach the next challenge, how you carry yourself in everyday interactions. It's important to understand that speaking up doesn't always mean being confrontational. It can be as simple as sharing an opinion, asking a question, or expressing a boundary. It's not about volume or intensity, it's about presence. It's about not shrinking in moments where you have something meaningful to contribute. And when you practice that consistently, your voice becomes steadier, your thoughts become clearer, and your confidence becomes more grounded. There will be moments when it feels easier to go back to old habits, to stay quiet, to avoid tension, to let things pass. That pull doesn't disappear overnight. But each time you resist it, each time you choose expression over avoidance, you strengthen something within yourself. You build trust in your ability to handle whatever follows. And that trust is what confidence is made of. Over time, you'll notice a shift. Not just in how others respond to you, but in how you respond to yourself. You stop doubting whether you should speak. You stop overanalyzing every word. You begin to trust that your voice has value, even when it's not perfect, even when it's not fully formed. Confidence is not found in waiting. It's built in the moments you decide your voice matters enough to be heard. Respect is often misunderstood as something you can demand through words, status, or force. But real respect doesn't respond to pressure. It responds to consistency. It is built quietly over time through the way you carry yourself, the way you respond under pressure, and the standards you refuse to compromise. You can ask for respect. You can insist on it. But if your actions don't align with that expectation, the request holds no weight. People pay attention to patterns more than promises. They notice how you react when challenged, how you handle disagreement, how you treat yourself when no one is watching. If you tolerate behavior that undermines you, it creates confusion. It sends mixed signals. On one hand, you may say you expect respect, but on the other, your actions suggest that you are willing to accept less. And in that gap, your message loses its strength. Demonstrating respect starts with how you treat yourself. Not in a superficial way, but in the decisions you make daily. The way you manage your time, the way you speak about yourself, the way you allow others to engage with you. When you consistently show that your time and energy matter, others begin to recognize that standard. Not because you explained in detail, but because you lived it without exception. There's also a level of emotional control that plays a role. Many people believe that raising their voice or reacting strongly will make them appear more authoritative. In reality, it often has the opposite effect. When you lose control, you give away your power. But when you stay grounded, when you respond instead of react, you create a presence that feels steady and reliable. That kind of presence earns respect naturally. It doesn't need to force it. It's important to understand that demonstrating respect doesn't mean being passive. It doesn't mean allowing others to cross your boundaries or dismiss your perspective. It means addressing those moments with clarity rather than aggression. You can be firm without being hostile. You can be direct without being disrespectful. And in doing so, you set a tone that others are more likely to follow. There will always be people who test limits, intentionally or not. That's part of any human interaction. What matters is how you respond in those moments. If your response is inconsistent, if you sometimes allow certain behaviors and other times push back, it becomes difficult for others to understand where you stand. Consistency removes that uncertainty. It creates a clear, predictable standard that others learn to respect. Another aspect that often goes unnoticed is how you treat others. Respect is not a one-way expectation. If you expect to be treated with consideration, you have to model that behavior as well. The way you listen, the way you acknowledge others, the way you handle differences, all contribute to the environment you create. When you offer respect consistently, you increase the likelihood of receiving it in return. Not as a guarantee, but as a natural outcome of the dynamic you've established. Over time, the need to demand respect fades. Not because you lowered your standards, but because your actions made those standards clear. People understand what you accept and what you don't without needing constant reminders. Your presence communicates it. Your consistency reinforces it. Respect is not built in a single moment. It is built in the accumulation of small, aligned actions, in the choices you make when it would be easier to compromise, in the discipline to remain steady when emotions rise, in the commitment to live in a way that reflects the value you place on yourself and others. The life you want is not created by chance, luck, or vague intention. It is shaped by the standards you choose to live by every single day. Standards are not just ideas you agree with when it's convenient. They are the lines you refuse to cross, the behaviors you commit to even when no one is watching, the decisions you make when faced with options that test your discipline. They define the quality of your actions, and your actions define the quality of your life. Most people focus on outcomes. They think about success, respect, fulfillment, and growth as distant destinations. But those outcomes are not reached by hoping for better circumstances. They are reached by setting higher expectations for how you show up in the present. If your standards are low, your results will reflect that. Not because you lack potential, but because your daily choices are aligned with what you've decided is acceptable. Standards operate quietly. They don't demand attention, but they influence everything. The way you manage your time, the effort you put into your work, the type of people you surround yourself with, the way you respond to challenges. When your standards are clear, decisions become simpler. You don't waste time debating what to do in every situation. You already know what aligns with your values and what doesn't. The difficulty is that raising your standards often requires letting go of what feels familiar. It may mean stepping away from habits that once felt comfortable but no longer serve you. It may mean creating distance from environments or relationships that don't meet the level you're aiming for. And that process can feel uncomfortable, even isolating at times. Because growth rarely feels easy in the moment it's happening. There's also a level of responsibility that comes with higher standards. You can no longer blame circumstances or wait for external motivation. When you set a standard, you take ownership of maintaining it. That means showing up when you don't feel like it. It means staying consistent when progress feels slow. It means holding yourself accountable without needing constant reminders from others. At the same time, standards are not about perfection. They're about direction. You will have moments where you fall short, where your actions don't fully align with what you expect from yourself. That doesn't invalidate the standard, it reinforces the need to return to it. The key is not to lower the bar in response to difficulty, but to strengthen your commitment to reaching it. As your standards rise, your environment begins to shift. You become more selective with your time and energy. You engage in conversations that add value instead of drain it. You pursue opportunities that challenge you instead of settling for what is easy. And gradually, the results begin to reflect that change. Not instantly, but consistently over time. People often look at someone who has achieved a certain level of success or fulfillment and assume it happened because of talent or opportunity. What they don't see are the standards behind those results. The discipline to follow through, the refusal to accept less, the willingness to do what is required even when it's uncomfortable. Those standards are what make the difference. The life you want is not something you stumble into. It is something you build, decision by decision, standard by standard. Every choice you make either reinforces the level you're aiming for or pulls you away from it. And over time, those choices accumulate. They shape your identity, your habits, your results. If you want a different life, you have to be willing to set different standards. Not just in what you expect from others, but in what you expect from yourself.